Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with the Eerie News. How's everyone doing? Today is May 19th, 2023, Friday. May 19th, 2023. And today we're going to start off with I really like the name of this animal. It's a snapping turtle called, you can't make this up, Chonkasaurus. All right. This is out of the UPI.com titled Massive Chicago River Snapping Turtle Dubbed Chonkasaurus. A giant snapping turtle, dubbed Chonkasaurus, is becoming an online celebrity after it was caught on camera lounging on some rocks in the Chicago River. Joey Santori posted a video showing the gargantuan amphibian he spotted enjoying the sun near Goose Island on the north branch of the Chicago River. Great to see this beast thriving here on what was once a toxic river, but is slowly getting cleaned up and restored. Somebody planted a bunch of native plants up the river from here too. I can only wonder this thing's been eating, Santori wrote. The massive snapping turtle was dubbed Chonkasaurus by locals. Santori estimated the snapping turtle, believed to be a female, weighs at least 60 pounds. Biologists said Chonkasaurus appears to be 40 to 50 years old. Wow, that's great. I love that Chonkasaurus. Chonkasaurus. All right, can you imagine a chicken named Chonkasaurus? How big that would have to be. Anyway, let's get on to the next story. This is out of Eerie News, and this is titled Cattle Mutilations. Who or what is the culprit? Reports of cattle mutilations date back for years. The latest occurred in Texas. Ranchers in Texas are left scratching their heads after 6 cattle were found dead with the tongues completely removed. Strangest of all, there was no blood spilled around the carcasses. One animal was found along a state highway, and further investigation found that 5 other cattle had been killed the same way along the same highway in Madison, Brazos, and Robertson counties. The tongues were completely removed from the body after a straight, clean cut with apparent precision. The animal appeared not to struggle during the removal, neither were there footprints or tire tracks around it. Predators stayed away from the remains, which decayed untouched for several weeks. 2 of the 5 cows had a circular cut made to remove the anus and the external genitalia. The same precisions were used for these cuts. The cause of death remains unknown. In the fall of 2022, 18 cows were found outside the town of Meeker, Colorado. Some had signs of being killed by an animal like a wolf, but there were no tracks or evidence of a predator in the area. A month later, at least 40 calves were reported dead. Prior to October 2022, there were 8 officially reported wolf sightings in the area over the last few years. Pathology reports issued by veterinary labs confirm there was no evidence of disease, and in the cattle, of course. Since many believe that it would be impossible for humans to have mutilated these cattle in such a manner in the middle of nowhere, so suspicions turns to otherworldly beings. Eli Honrich, a New Mexico rancher, has found mutilated cattle 40 times throughout a 30-year career. Discoveries like his have been found in ranches across the United States in the last 50 years, hitting a peak in the 1970s. The missing body parts don't have value, whether it's ears, tongues, udders, brains, eyes, or genitals. As reported by the High Plains Journal, quote, sometimes their bodies are drained of blood, bones are broken, scavengers avoid the carcasses, and a medicinal smell is reported at some kill sites. Additionally, some animals have been found to have strange substances in their blood, such as barbiturates, mescaline, anticoagulants, and potassium cyanide. Possible explanations for these mutilations fall into several categories. Many believe they are either due to predators, government experiments, satanic cults, or extraterrestrials. Now, putting those 4 in the same sentence is shocking, but so are the nature of these deaths. Aliens and covert government programs have received coverage throughout the years. But let's jump down the rabbit hole of humans committing these atrocities. Initially, the cult aspect is discounted because of the difficulty in carrying out the operation. And if the aim is to use a cow's tongue, why not buy it at a butcher shop? This suspicion would account for these incidents. But as found in the necropsy reports, some of these animals appear to be drugged, And in some cult beliefs, the suffering of an animal will give power to the potency of the spell it will be used for. How widespread is this belief? More than you would suspect. Let's go back in time, shall we? Let's go back to 1989. U.S. forces entered the home of General Noriega, the deposed dictator of Panama. The first thing that assailed the U.S. forces was the horrid stench that drifted from the second floor. They found a rotting cow's tongue, wrapped in red cloth, folded in half, and nailed shut with over 24 nails, nested in white cornmeal, and 8 rotting eggs. Insects had overrun the putrid mess. A special agent with the Army's Criminal Investigation Command pried open the tongue to find a soggy paper with a name written on it. The writing could not be deciphered, but other items found in the home confirmed that it was part of a voodoo-like ritual targeting one of Noriega's enemies. The property became known as the Witch House. Further investigation found that Noriega used a Brazilian black magic witch to cast spells against his enemies and to assure his victories. Some of his strange actions would later be attributed to his belief in these occult rituals. In an effort to find evidence of drug trafficking, a search continued in Noriega's house close to the military base at Fort Amador. Inside a freezer, they found banana leaves wrapped around white powder, first believed to be cocaine. That turned out to be wrong. And the second assumption, that they were tamales, was wrong as well. An agent from the Army's Criminal Investigation Command came to the conclusion they were part of binding rituals in which each tamale, quote unquote, represented one of Noriega's enemies, which he thought to defeat through sorcery. Inside the banana leaves were slips of paper with the name of his opponents. Among the names found was Seymour Hersh, a reporter who wrote about Noriega's illegal activities, and John Poindexter, Reagan's national security advisor. Inside a slimy ball of cornmeal entwined with blue ribbon and white string was a picture of Guillermo Endara, who was running against Noriega in the presidential election. Red wax was dripped over a picture of Ronald Reagan before an ashtray was placed on top of it. A mixture of moldy fruit held papers with the names of various important American politicians and officials, as well as those of other countries. An expert on the occult determined that Noriega practiced a mixture of African-based religions and Catholicism. This included belief systems such as Santeria, Candomblé, and a darker form known as Brujeria. When Noriega was indicted by federal grand juries in Florida, Panamanians demonstrated against him and Noriega disappeared. The witch prudently disappeared from the scene as well. Later, it was determined that the Noriega's witch had fled the house only steps ahead of U.S. troops, forcing her to leave behind important papers and photos that proved her identity. This included her diary. Her name was Rosaleide dos Gracias Oliveira, born around 1962. Pictures of the plump, dark-skinned woman adorn Noriega's home and office. She also left behind pictures of her husband and son. Her personal manual of spells, titled Exu, was found. The title translates to the devil, which must be appropriated at the beginning of Candomblé ceremony so that the rites will not be disrupted by him. In the diary, she detailed resisting Noriega's drunken sexual advances, as well as a visit 2 days before the American invasion to Isla Coiba, a notorious penal colony established in 1919. It was feared for its brutal conditions. Executions took place after extreme tortures were performed on inmates. The diary did not explain what she did there on her visit. Noriega had a small shrine dedicated to Candomblé, a Brazilian form of voodoo, at the commando school he founded on Coiba. There was evidence he practiced a malevolent form of the religion which involved diabolical spells. Oliveira's diary also detailed that she was the last of several witches Noriega used over the years. Authorities were hoping she could shed light on Noriega's black magic practices, including the murder in 1985 of Panamanian opposition leader Hugo Spadafora. His headless body was found stuffed in a U.S. mail bag on the Costa Rican border. According to a coroner's report, Spadafora had been tortured and sodomized. His head was never found. It was believed his murder was a ritual killing. CID also discovered 2 items associated with Palomayombe, a cult that requires the use of human bones and body parts, especially skulls and brains. Palomayombe is based on the belief that spirits can be created from dead persons and then invoked for assistance and protection. A rock covered with Palomayombe markings were Noriega's witch house. Under it was a list of over 20 enemies, including the Spadafora family. Eventually, U.S. investigators found occult items used in rituals in 5 places frequented by Noriega. This included his home in the exclusive Altos de Golf neighborhood, where a shrine was erected in a back garden. It contained a mask used in Abacua, a Cuban secret society that practices Palomayombe. It was evident that Noriega believed in Oliveira's powers, but it appeared she couldn't reverse his fate. In 1990, Noriega was in U.S. custody where he was convicted and sentenced to 17 years, which he served in a federal penitentiary. He was extradited to France, who sent him back to Panama, where he died in custody in 2017 at the age of 83. As to his sorceress, she is believed to have fled from Panama and returned to Brazil, despite being placed on the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division's most wanted list. You may ask yourself how this connects to cattle mutilations in Texas. If political dictators believe in these rituals, so do many others who are hungry for power and wealth at the cost of human and animals' misery. Present-day cartels have overrun our southern border. Many who are believers in these types of dark cults. There are also followers spread throughout the country. Believing they would go to any lengths to acquire the most powerful ingredients is not as far-fetched as believing that visitors from another planet repeatedly abduct cattle to remove the most undesirable parts of the animals. Such is the nature of rabbit holes, especially the deep ones. And for those of you watching the video version of this is a close-up of the picture of what they found of the U.S. troops, what they found in Noriega's house. This is one of the altars, as you could tell. He's had a lot of stuff on there, all right? And it's ironic that he has a Catholic rosary, which is definitely Catholic amongst all these other items that have nothing to do with Catholicism. As a matter of fact, it's anti-Catholic. But anyway, there you go. Cattle mutilations and Noriega's occult beliefs. Again, such is the nature of rabbit holes. Anyway, let's go on to our next interesting story. This is out of AP News, and this is titled Vatican Experts Uncovering Gilded Glory of Hercules Statue Struck by Lightning. Vatican City, scaffolding in a niche of the Vatican Museum's round hall conceal from view the work of restorers who are removing centuries of grime from the largest known bronze statue of the ancient world, the gilded Hercules Mastai Rigeti. For more than 150 years, the 13-foot figure of the half-human Roman god of strength has stood in that niche, barely garnering notice among other antiquities because of the dark coating it had acquired. But it was only after removing a layer of wax and other material from a 19th century restoration that Vatican experts understood the statue's true splendor as one of the most significant gilded statues of its time. Museum goers will be able to see its grandeur for themselves once the restoration is finished, which is expected in December. The original gilding is exceptionally well preserved, especially for the consistency and homogeneity, Vatican Museum restorer Alice Baltera said. The discovery of the colossal bronze statue in 1864 during work on a banker's villa near Rome's Campo del Fiore Square made global headlines. Visitors drawn to the ancient wonder at the time included Pope Pius IX, who later added the work to the papal collection. The statue depicting Hercules after he finished his labors had the last names of the Pope, Mastai, and of the banker, Pietro Rigeti, added to its title. The statue has been variously dated from the end of the 1st to the beginning of the 3rd century. Even in its day, the towering Hercules was treated with reverence. The inscription FCS accompanying the statue on a slab of Tavernine marble indicates it was struck by lightning, according to Claudia Valeri, curator of the Vatican Museum's Department of Greek and Roman Antiquities. As a result, it was buried in a marble shrine, according to Roman rites that saw lightning as an expression of divine forces. FCS stands for Fulgu Conditum Sumanium, a Latin phrase meaning here is buried a Sumanium thunderbolt. Sumanus was the ancient Roman god of nocturnal thunder. The ancient Romans believed that not only was any object stricken imbued with divinity, but also the spot where it was hit and buried. It is said that sometimes being struck by lightning generates love, but also eternity. Vatican Museum's archaeologist Giandomenico Spinola said, "The Hercules Mastari got his eternity because having been struck by lightning, it was considered a sacred object, which preserved it until about 150 years ago. The burial protected the gilding, but also caused dirt to build up on the statue, which Baltera said is very delicate and painstaking to remove. The only way is to work precisely with special magnifying glasses, removing all the small incrustations one by one," she said. The work to remove the wax and other materials that were applied during the 19th century restoration is complete. Going forward, restorers plan to make fresh cast out of resin to replace the plaster patches that covered missing pieces, including on part of the nape of the neck and the pubis. The most astonishing finding to emerge during the preliminary phase of the restoration was the skill with which the smelters fused mercury to gold, making the gilded surface more enduring. The history of this work is told by its gilding. It is one of the most compact and solid gildings found to date, said Ulderico Santamaria, a University of Tuscia professor who is head of the Vatican Museum's Scientific Research Laboratory. So yeah, it's funny because it got struck by lightning and it was buried, it got preserved. And 13 feet, that's a huge statue. Look at the dimensions for anybody that's looking at the pictures. That's incredible. That's and to think that it was there all along, in a niche, and nobody was paying any attention to it for 150 years. That is, for those of you that are seeing the video version of this newscast, it's got some great pictures that they've got going on. And this thing, God, it looks bigger than 13 feet from here. 13 feet tall. Yeah, it is beautiful. Anyway, well, let's get back to weird news. Let's go back to Eerie News. And here we go. And the next story, this cooperates, is called The Black Cannon of Lyons. All right. Now, in early 1893, Joseph Antoine Bouillon died. A defrocked priest, he was the head of a schismatic branch called the Church of the Carmel. He was also known as the Black Canon of Lyons. Now you're going to find out where he got that moniker. Born in 1824, Bouillon was ordained in 1848. He became a follower of Eugene Vintras, once a foreman in a cardboard box factory, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Elijah. He founded two sects, the Work of Mercy and the Eliot Church of Carmel. Vintras was dogged by rumors of demonic rituals and sexual excesses. In an 1846 pamphlet, he was accused of homosexuality, conducting black masses in the nude, and masturbating on the altar. He was condemned by the Pope, which would have made him a very unsuitable person for a Catholic priest to fraternize with. Despite the gossip, only an accusation of fraud put Vintras in prison for 5 years. In 1852, he fled to London since his sect was openly persecuted. In 1859, Bouillon joined Vintras' sect. The following year, he was suspended from office and accused of sacrificing an infant, his own bastard child, during Mass. He faced trial not only for his crime but for fraud. He served 3 years in prison. The one that they are accusing of sacrificing his own child was Bouillon, who was a priest. Incredible. When Vintras died in 1875, Bouillon claimed successorship to the Carmelites. He created a schism, and in Vintras' fashion he claimed to be the reincarnation of John the Baptist. Throughout his life, Abbé Bouillon, Abbé, by the way, is French, it's like the father. Throughout his life, Abbé Bouillon was accused of being a decadent Satanist who taught sexual magic and engaged in fornication and black rites with his housekeeper and priestess Juliette Thibault, who was a former nun. Once defrocked, he was known to administer La Messe Noire with all its obscene rites in a private chapel beyond the heights of Montparnasse. However, he also freed persons from curses at a hefty fee. A lady came to him who suffered from a double spell. Trees and plants withered upon her estate. The Black Canon, by his incantation, instantly cured her anguish, and since she didn't pay his entire fee, he didn't lift a curse upon her land. Bulan's teachings were based on sex magic in two different forms. One, sexual intercourse with the higher spirit world and chosen human individuals through unions of wisdom. Or two, sexual intercourse with the lower and elemental spirit world and ordinary human individuals through unions of charity. As an aside, the one or the two, usually the human individuals would normally ended up being him. Isn't that interesting? He claimed to cure diseases and described himself as a forerunner of the Holy Ghost, and he had ardent followers who called his punishments as, quote, sufferings accepted for the greater glory of God, end quote. However, there were those who believed that Abbe Bulan thought he could cast spells and was capable of supernatural strength. 3 of his acquaintances became almost blind according to the threat made by the Abbe. Bulan had sent them placards covered with red inscriptions. They had a peculiar odor and dust from the letters that was so fine it mingled with the atmosphere. Once the placards were burned, the sight of the 3 victims was restored. The Abbe predicted to another person that he would have visions, which resulted in terrible nightmares and headaches. His servant would go on to confess that he was paid by Abbe Bulan to put opiate in the man's coffee. Bulan would write to all his disciples in red ink, instructing them to hang them on the wall or wear them against their heart. Oswald Wirth, tarot illustrator, and Stanislas de Guaita started as followers of Bulan. However, they turned against him and released stories about, quote, the adultery, incest, and bestiality, end quote, they witnessed when attending his rituals. Bulan was described as a pontiff of infamy, a base idol of the mystical Sodom, a magician of the worst type, a wretched criminal, an evil sorcerer, and the founder of an infamous sect. Monsieur Georges Duval once spent the evening with the Abbé and in jest asked him how he could make a fortune. The response from Bulan was quite serious. He said, quote, take a young black hen, and when you catch her, she must make no noise. Go at 11 o'clock in the evening when she's asleep, take her by the neck and hold her only tightly enough to keep her quiet. Go on the same broad highway where 2 roads cross. There at midnight, make a circle with a cypress wand. Place yourself in the center and cut the hen in 2 parts as you pronounce these words 3 times. Elohim, Esaim, Frugativi, Eb Apelavi. Then turn towards the east, kneel, and say a prayer from page 85. This done, you will make the appeal. Then the spirit of evil will appear, clothed in an embroidered scarlet coat, a yellow vest, and water-green culotte. The head resembling the head of a dog, with ass's ears, will be surmounted by 2 horns, and its legs and feet will be like those of a cow. It will ask your wishes. When you will say what you think best, and you will be the richest among men. End quote. Monsieur Duval obeyed his instructions, which resulted only in the loss of his pocketbook. Upon the death of Abbé Bulan, Monsieur Jules Bois, an apostle of literary mysticism, accused Jospin Peladin and his follower Marquis Stanislas de Guaita of having caused the Abbé's death by envoûtement, the French word for enchantment. Henri Jules Bois wrote Le Satanisme et la Magie, Satanism and Magic. I'm sorry if I'm killing the French pronunciation on this. He was a noted friend of MacGregor Mathers, the founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. A mystic explained envoûtement thus: you hate some person so that you wish his death, but do not care to risk your own life. You make or have made a waxen effigy of your enemy. Then you place on or about this effigy a handkerchief or something else taken from the object of your hatred. From that time on, the waxen image has the sensibilities and the vitality of your enemy. Then thrust needles in the effigy, strike it on the head, break it in pieces. At the same time, it will cause your enemy to die in a horrible torture. And as Allah does not believe in the black arts, you, a real assassin, are free from all punishment. Monsieur Jules Bois said, it is incontestable that Peladin and Guaita practiced the black arts daily, and for 2 years the Abbé Bulan struggled with the evil spirit sent by his enemies from Paris. It is not at all impossible that he died from the supreme envoûtement. Jules Bois challenged de Guaita to a pistol duel. De Guaita agreed and took part in the duel, but as both men missed, no one was hurt. Charles Marie Georges Huysmans published his work as Joris Karl Huysmans. He was the author of La Basse, which translates to down there. And he said that for a year Peladon had sent him each night blows on the head and face when he was ready to go to sleep. He tried to believe that it was his imagination. However, he noticed his cat received shocks. At the same time, he was convinced the blows were the result of magic. In the occult world, it was said that Chantinder, a character in the novel La Basse, was based on Abbe Roca, who published a pamphlet hostile to the Pope. He was thought to be honest with his convictions, in which he tried to reconcile the Church with modern ideas and to associate Christ with Buddha. Husmanus people his work with real-life characters that were Catholic but had turned against the Church. A.E. Waite criticized the work. He said, quote, "Under the thinnest disguise of fiction, he gives in his romance of La Basse an incredible and untranslatable picture of sorcery, sacrilege, black magic, and nameless abominations secretly practicing in Paris." End quote. For believers in the black arts, if the air was pinched at a distance from a person who had been enchanted, he screams. If instead a wax doll or a glass of water is charged with the sensibility of the subject, whenever the glass is rubbed, the subject has the same sensation. Or if the doll's hair is pulled, the person suffers as if their own hair was pulled. The person would suffer agony if the doll is brutalized. If the doll is crushed, the subject dies. Dr. Hart of the British Medical Journal claimed that Peladon was incapable of sending blows every night to Monsieur Husmanus. He switched out dolls with one which was supposedly hex, and the subject felt every sensation as if it was charged. It was a charged doll when it was not. Prior to his death, Abbe Boulon had quarreled bitterly with Stanislas de Guaita. He suspected that de Guaita used a spell known as the Flying Spirit. Boulon consulted a clairvoyant who told him the weapon Guaita would use was poison made of farina, meat, sacramental bread, mercury, animal extracts, human blood acetate of morphine, and the juice of an asp. The poison would be conveyed to Boulon through the spirit of some dead person who Guaita would summon from the underworld for that mission. Boulon locked himself in his room for several months, donning his sacerdotal robes, setting up an altar, and appealing to all invisible ones whose aid might prove beneficial. It lasted for months, but Boulon thought he triumphed when he died of heart disease and not Guaita's poison. The story goes that even though the Abbe had escaped the flying spirit, it would have to finish its mission. Since Boulon was beyond its reach, it returned to Stanislas de Guaita and caused the death of its master, which occurred in 1897. He had died of a drug overdose since he was a morphine addict. De Guaita, said to always dress in red, was influenced by the writings of l'Abbé Alphonse Louis Constant, alias Eliphas Levi, a prominent French occultist. And for those of you who think that he's the one that came up with that Baphomet statue, which has been used a lot lately. In 1888, de Guaita founded the Ordre Cabaliste de la Rocroi, or the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose Cross. Rosicrucianism is an esoteric movement which first began with the publication of the 3 Rosicrucian manifestos in the early 17th century. Husmans was thought to be influenced by Zola, Flaubert, and the de Goncourt brothers. He wrote a Rebours, translates to backwards, about a decadent aristocrat. It was followed by La Basse. Its main subject was Satanism. Some of the satanic characters were modeled on persons alive in France when he wrote it, such as Abbe Van Eyck and one-time Abbe Boulon, Henriette Maillat, and Berthe Courier, both who were mistresses to most of the writers in Paris. It was translated and published 30 years later in the United States. The plates were melted down since it was considered vice in New York. It wasn't republicized until 1958 under the English title Down There. The main figure was Durtal, a thinly disguised as Husmans, who falls under the influence of 3 demons. He is writing the history of Gilles de Rais, the 15th century Marshal of France who fought alongside Joan of Arc. He was a sadist who murdered more than 700 children. He meets 3 more characters that prove to him that Satanism was still very much alive as it was when de Rais existed. Husmans died in 1907 as a devout Catholic after repenting all his sins. He never married or had children. He had long-term on and off relationships with a seamstress. A few months after the death of Abbe Boulon in 1893, testimony was given as to how to recognize one who is possessed. There are four principal signs. 1. No known remedy relieves the afflicted. 2. This, by the way, this sounds like something that was issued by the Catholic Church. 2. The person speaks of incidents and facts beyond their natural reach, which nobody has revealed to them. 3. The person foretells events and speaks several languages unknown to them before their affliction. 4. In the presence of a priest and at sacred ceremonies, the person trembles, suffers pain, writhes, and blasphemes. At the end of the 19th century, exorcisms usually took place in church, in the presence of faithful assembled at prayer, particularly at the Feast of the Nativity, of the Resurrection, of the Ascension, of Pentecost, of the Virgin Mary, and of the Apostles. The possessed individual attended morning mass. A stole was passed around their neck to tie the devils that had become the masters of their body. Then the sign of the cross was made upon the person, and they were sprinkled with holy water. The flagellum demonium contained the most complete formula of exorcism, consisting of well-known prayers mingled with the most ancient and strangest appellation of God, such as On Adonai Tetragramat. I've always had a problem with this word. Tetragrammaton, and others which come in art from Chaldea, from Phoenicia, and from Greece. The words were supposed to possess in themselves a certain power of evocation of celestial virtues which terrify the infernal legions. Certain words of Christ, according to St. Matthew's, are used to drive out evil spirits. At the end of the 19th century, exorcisms were performed in the monastery in Soligny-la-Trappe, Orne, France. It is the house of origins of the Trappists. The monks did not admit it, but they would not turn anyone away either if they came for an exorcism. It was said the one who broke the spells was an old monk. He would cast devils into animals. Pigs were the favorite. The old spell smasher would whip the swine with beads and sprinkle them with holy water. Then they would recover and become happy once again, since the devils had been expelled. Monsieur Gilbert Augustin Thierry, who authored Une âme en peine, A Soul in Pain, described the cure of petits talets, or small slabs, in which a special mass was said. It was known as a red mass, or mass of the martyrs. Red flowers were placed upon the altar, and the priest wore a red stole. The church was draped in red and purple. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that mass. But anyway, my comment on this is, these were all well-educated men. I would say about the only one that kind of like fell between the cracks, and I just think he was pretty deranged, was this guy Vitras, who was the foreman in a cardboard factory. But all these other men were well-educated men. Boulon himself, these all went to before they became priests, they went to seminary. There was one of them who was a marquis, writers, and they all believed in enchantments and spells, the flying spirit. But what's disturbing, I think, is they are describing like there's an underground of, but a very used underground of black magic that was happening in France, or in at least Paris, during this time period. Um, you know, what is it? Maybe I want to say all the 1900s, all that whole time period. I don't think it doesn't sound like a one-off of somebody that, like let's say, they say, hey, I thought of this weird subject for I don't know, a piece of fiction, or they're describing something that sounds like it was commonplace, and that gives you pause to think what was really going on you know like, in other words, maybe you had people that would be going to Sunday to mass, and then God knows what else they were doing behind closed doors. Makes you think of Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, doesn't it? Okay, last story. This is out of Mysterious Universe, and this is titled A Strange Story of a Mysterious Village of Vampires in Ontario. Nestled within the rolling picturesque terrain of Madawaska Valley of Ontario, Canada, is the quaint, serene settlement of Wilno. It was the scenic landscape here that drew in settlers from the Polish cultural region of Kashubia in the 1850s who thought this place reminded them of their own homeland and fled to escape from oppressive Prussian rule. Indeed, Wilno is the oldest Polish Kashubian permanent settlement in Canada, and here they built a church, general store, and post office, and the village gradually drew in a steady droves of Polish Kashubian settlers, which only grew more when the Canadian Atlantic Railway came through to link Wilno with Ottawa in 1894. To this day, Wilno holds to the proud tradition and culture of these people, and is steeped in history and imbued with a certain quaint old world charm that has made it a tourist destination, but thrumming under the surface are strange tales of old religions, black magic, and supernatural undead monsters. Although the settlers of Wilno were by and large staunchly Roman Catholic, they had nevertheless brought back folklore, legends, superstitions, and beliefs from the old country, all of which course beneath the outward veneer. Among these was a persistent belief in witchcraft, black magic, and various supernatural creatures, including evil spirits, magical dwarves, and vampires. And despite their Catholicism, many of the settlers believed that these dark forces were also very real and that they had brought them along to these new shores. It was these folk beliefs that in the 1960s drew the attention of a Harvard-educated professor of Slavic languages by the name of John Louis Perkowski, who was fascinated to find that these old traditions and beliefs from Poland were alive and strong right there in North America, and with funding from the National Museum of Man, now the Canadian Museum of History, he made his journey to Wilno in 1968 in order to study these traditions, from here penetrating deep into a sinister world of vampires and the supernatural like something straight out of a horror story. Through interviewing various locals, Perkowski soon established that indeed, belief in supernatural creatures existed among the people of Wilno, especially concerning vampires, which they believed roamed about there, and were depicted very similarly to how they were seen in the Old World. There were supposedly two main types of vampires, according to the locals, the Vijeski and the Wupish, I don't know, both of which were supposedly cursed from their very birth and doomed to inevitably become the undead. In the case of the Vijeski, the child was born with a membrane sac on their crown, and the Wupish were children born with 2 teeth. A Vijeski could be cured if the mother kept the membrane for 7 years, then ground it up into the child's food and had them eat it. With the Wupish, there was no cure. That when they eventually died, they were doomed to return from the dead to stalk the night looking for blood. According to the local traditions, a newly minted vampire would kill off its family members one by one every night until no one was left, after which it would make its way to the nearest church or chapel and ring the bell, and anyone who heard this would die within the year. Sinister stuff for sure. In the local lore, there were several ways to deal with these vampires. One was to bury them face down before they turned, so that they would merely dig deeper rather than dig out, or to alternately bury them with sand or netting, because these creatures were said to be unable to leave their grave until they counted all of the grains of sand or untied every knot in the net, with one knot supposedly taking a vampire an entire year to undo. Another more gruesome way to deal with a vampire was to behead the foul beast and put the head between its feet, or to drive a long nail into its forehead as it slept. It's all very ominous stuff that seems as if it must surely be pure folklore. But Perkowski claimed that there were reports that this was all very real, with him gathering several eyewitnesses' accounts of these malevolent entities. One local would tell him, quote, "When we were there on that farm, something came to my daughter. Something came in the night and drew blood from her arm. It was a vampire. It came to my daughter at night and took marrow. There was a sign. A ring was visible. She was weak and had all her blood drawn out. It healed later. What they did is forgotten. Mind you, he came at night when she was sleeping. It was a vampire that came. Have you ever heard of such a thing? We didn't tell anyone anything. We didn't do anything. She wasn't sick at all. She was kind of weak for a while. You know, she was about 16, 15 years old. We kept it a secret. We never told anybody." Then another account read, "There was a vampire was born to some people. The child was fine, baptized. Everything was good, and he died. I was there. It was 40 years ago, and my neighbor was there. They said that I was to sew a garment for the child, and I took it and was sewing the garment. But I said to Mrs. Martin Itmansky, Come here. The child is alive. The child is coming to life. But the mother is dying. And then Mrs. Imansky said, yes, but I will put it straight. She took a needle from the ring finger, but I can't say whether it was 2 drops or 3. She drew blood. The blood was alive, and she administered it. When she gave it from the girl to the mother got better and began to sit up. The child grew cold, and they buried it. If it had been laid out for burial, she would have been taken dying to the grave. Yet another was given as follows. Mrs. Kilby said that the grandfather was a vampire. He was improperly seen to. 14 people, counting my son, died. 1 a year. They just died suddenly. Perkowski even talked to people who claimed to have witnessed vampires being killed in their graves, and that this happened rather often in Wilno, but that it was kept a secret so that the outside world would know. One of the Perkowski sources would tell him of this. There was a lot of that at Wilno in the graves. They opened graves, they cut the heads off. When they die, were born vampires and are not seen to, then they have to dig up the graves. First he carries off his relatives, and then as far as the bell rings. It happened at Wilno. They had to dig up many, but it was not revealed. They had to dig it up and cut off the head while it sat in the coffin. Ultimately, Perkowski would interview over a dozen such witnesses to this vampire phenomena in Wilno, as well as gather stories of witchcraft and other supernatural entities such as dwarves and succubi going on there, all of which he would make into an 85-page report titled Vampires, Dwarves, and Witches Among the Ontario Kashubs. This oddball report would be submitted to the museum and be met with more than its fair share of raised eyebrows. To them it was a bunch of nonsense and a waste of their funding, a load of sensationalist garbage that was a stain on their reputation. But they were unable to brush it under the carpet before the media caught a whiff of it. Before long, reporters were flocking to Wilno, looking to investigate all the supposedly real vampires there, much to the chagrin of the local residents who denounced the stories as nothing more than lore and legend. Indeed, they were quick to dismiss Perkowski's reports as nothing more than flights of fancy at best, with one bishop telling a reporter in exasperation, I was amazed that such a thing would be printed. They're like stories my grandmother would tell us to scare us. It is possible that 1 or 2 nuts have these beliefs, but the implications is that all of us do. We get a big laugh out of it. We know the people who have manufactured the story just by reading it. That nonsense of driving nails. My impression is that he probably struck a microphone under their noses, and to get rid of him, they'd made up these tales. Even some of Perkowski's informants and sources turned on him, accusing him of misrepresenting and twisting what they had said, instigating dishonest or manipulative lines of questioning, and even straight up making stuff up. One resident would tell reporters, this anthropologist, he was not a sincere man. He was not what he claimed. He sat there, here with me in my kitchen. I told him the old wives' tales, things my grandmother told me. But we don't believe these things anymore. It's all crap, just pure crap. And underline that I said pure crap. Regardless of all of this negative publicity and the people will know trying to wave it away, the vampire story stuck. And to this day, the town is almost known as much for tales of dark, blood-sucking monsters as it is for its rich history and Polish Kashubian cultural traditions. It is a reputation that has lasted right up to the present, with residents still shaking their head about it and blowing off Pekrowski's staining of their legacy. One former resident has lamented of it. It's all bullcrap. Perkowski's work is not well researched, it's not contextualized, and he totally misread the community and his informants. He took a lot of the words from residents and twisted them. There was a lot of hurt in the 60s and 70s when this work came out, and still to this day. Fortunately, the vampire story has survived, and the true stories haven't come out. There's much more history, much more rich traditions in the area. That's what we want this community to be known for, and not something that's made up and supernatural. If you're looking at a vampire story, basically our identity was sucked right out of us. Sometimes the journalists and media are the vampires because they like to spread that falsehood, because it makes great television, but it's not fair to the people of Wilno, because that is not our history. On paper, there's this vampire story. But if you dig deep enough, you'll get at the heart of people, you'll get at the heart of this town. So, what are we to make of all of this? There seems to be certainty about what Perkowski wrote that should be taken with a grain of salt. He provides no evidence that any of this ever happened, There are no official accounts of corpse mutilations, no real solid names, dates, or locations in his eyewitness reports to independently verify any of it, and doesn't even name his supposed sources, simply calling them informants. It is very easy to believe that the possibility is strong that his report is embellished, at the very least, and even completely fabricated. There is also the fact that when asked why the museum had asked him to carry out this research, Porkowski once replied, "They publish these dry things on Eskimo stone carvings and how the Iroquois do this and that, and they thought they'd have a slightly jazzier thing. So I went along with them. I don't mean that they wanted to cheap publicity, but they thought that the report would have more general appeal than many of the things that they had produced. I think they're right. Ukrainian Easter eggs are interesting, granted, but of limited interest, whereas everybody likes to be frightened a little bit by the Dracula legend. Real vampires in Ontario? Probably not. Was it all embellished a bit? Most definitely. However, it all gives a curious look into a place most of us will never see or go to. And it certainly shines a light on the legends and lore of people who have chosen to take these stories to their new homes. What was Prokowski up to? What did he really find out there? We may never know for sure, and it remains a damn strange story all the same. And you know what? But what's really unusual is that there have been um, cemeteries dug up, as a matter of fact, in Poland, and they have found proof of what they call deviant burials, which is exactly what they described there. The bodies turned, face down, the heads being taken off and put between the legs, sickles placed on the neck or on the hips, all these different things that, in other words, this wasn't the norm. This wasn't like a traditional thing. It was done some to the corpse because of the fear that it was going to rise again. So I wouldn't be surprised that what he did produce, he was told, all right, and these people then were embarrassed when it came back because it made them feel like, oh, we sound like we're a bunch of cuckoo. In other words, they all believed it, maybe some more than others. But as long as you're all in on the secret and you all believe it, it's all good. But you don't want anybody else to know out there because then you all look like, especially we're talking the 1960s, you all sound like you're, you know, in other words, it makes you sound like stupid or superstitious. How's that? And I think that once this came back, they were like, no, 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 not us. That's what I think. I think this guy Perkowski was like, wow, this is really interesting. And and you know what? At the very end, at the very least, they could have done just printed up as folklore. Whatever. Anyway, I hope you like this edition of Eerie News. I will be back soon with you guys. And until then, thanks for spending this time.